been quite a bit of debate among pastors in the groups that I'm a part of on social media this week after the events that have transpired over this past week and the magnitude of what we have seen take place in our country. The question was, should we as pastors take a break from our regular preaching schedule, whatever we had planned for the week, whatever series you're in the middle? Do you just continue on with that series, or do you press pause on that to address the cultural context and what's happening? And it was a pretty even split between the two. On one side, there was a group that said, you have to press pause on whatever you're doing and address this. You got to meet people where they're at. They're wrestling through things. They're grappling with stuff. They're trying to figure it out, and it's on you as the pastor to shepherd them through that and help them process what they're thinking and what they're feeling in a biblical way. And then the other part of the groups would say, no, don't detour from what God has already laid on your heart to preach. Stick with your series. Address it perhaps, but don't go away from what you already had planned, because God is sovereign. If that's what God has already laid on your heart as a pastor to preach to your people, then that's what your people need to hear. So stick with it. Don't let cultural events trump what you're teaching from the Bible. And we here at G6 are in a unique situation this week because we actually get to do both. The passage that we are studying is incredibly relevant and timely for what we have seen happen this past week. Over the past week, as you have already no doubt heard or seen, and then as we prayed about earlier, but in case you're watching the recording of this on YouTube, or it's years or months down the road, this past week was a tragic one for our nation. Numerous different evil events transpired this week, from the stabbing of an innocent girl on a train to the assassination of a brother in Christ who was an advocate for free speech and the debating of ideas, to gruesome crimes in Dallas, to school shootings in Colorado. It just has been a lot for us to process as a country this week. And we look at these kind of events, and I think we're right to just throw our hands up in the air and go, what in the world is happening? Like, did we just completely fall off the rails this week, or what? Like, what is God doing in this? Why is this kind of stuff happening? And to make matters worse, we're trying to figure out and grapple with the severity of what we have witnessed, while there are those who are openly celebrating evil events in the streets, which just adds a whole layer of complexity to the emotions that we are feeling, right? And what is it we're supposed to do with this? When we see this kind of godlessness happening in our country, how are we as a church, how are we as Christ followers supposed to respond to that? What are we supposed to do with that? When we look to Scripture, which is the first place that we're gonna point you, right? You want to know how to respond as a Christ follower? Go to this book. And when we look at where we are at in our series as we work through characters in the Old Testament, tonight we happen to be in the character of Elijah. We're in 1 Kings chapters 17, 18, and 19. In this passage, let me just build up to this passage a little bit for you, okay? And you'll quickly see the connection between what we see as godlessness and being celebrated in our society to what was happening in Elijah's day. So last week we talked about King Solomon, right? Wisest man to ever live, son of David, who was a man after God's own heart. and Solomon fell, and he allowed evil and he allowed pagan gods to infiltrate the kingdom, and to the point that God said, I'm going to rip the kingdom away from you because you have not been faithful, you have not obeyed what I told you to do, and I'm going to rip the kingdom of Israel out of the hands of your son, Rehoboam. And so that's exactly what God does. God takes, after Solomon dies, which is where we're picking up here, God splits the kingdom, and we have a northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And the northern kingdom of Israel is 10 of the 12 tribes, and their king is Jeroboam. Jeroboam is a godless man who leads Israel deeper into pagan worship and sacrificing to pagan gods, and he rules for a few years. Then, after Jeroboam, his son reigns for about 2 years, and then he's assassinated. The guy who assassinated him, Baasha, he takes the kingdom of Israel, wipes out all of Jeroboam's entire family, and he reigns for about 20 years, 24 years or so. His son then takes up the mantle, and he reigns for about 2 years, and then he is also assassinated. He gets drunk and gets killed by a guy who then comes in, Zimri, and takes the throne. Zimri, who has just now become king, and now that he is ruling Israel, he lasts every bit of a week before he is killed. Actually, his kingdom gets ripped from him by someone else, and he commits suicide. So now someone else is ruling the kingdom, who is a big military commander. Omri is his name. He becomes king after this civil war, and he builds Samaria up as the capital, and then his son becomes king after him, and his son's name is Ahab. And Ahab we see in 1 Kings chapter 16. Go ahead and pull that up, Max, if you would, in chapter 16. I don't have it on the slide up there, so I'm going to use this monitor over here. And I'm not even going to read this whole thing, but Ahab, son of Omri, became king over Israel. And he was more wicked than all of these other kings before him. So I just gave you a lineage of 7 different kings, most of whom were either killed by other kings who usurped their throne, or they were conquered and then killed themselves. Like, there's so much chaos and wickedness happening and just battling, and there's just constant war waging over just a couple of decade period. We're just barely removed from David and Solomon, and you just see this level, this deepening of this moral bankruptcy that is happening in Israel. Until we get to Ahab, and at Ahab, we see the scriptures tell us that this guy is more wicked than all of the other ones put together. Ahab is one bad dude. And Ahab marries a woman named Jezebel. And Jezebel is as wicked and as vile as they come. She's a pagan. She brings in pagan gods, and she wants to eradicate all the prophets, all of the people who are devoted to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She wants to wipe them off the face of the earth, and she does. She murders many of them, hundreds of the prophets and the priests of the people of Israel, so that her religion can prosper. In fact, the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, Jesus condemns one of the churches by saying, you have adopted the spirit of Jezebel, meaning not necessarily her exactly, but she is so wicked that she has this air about her, this spirit about her that wants to replace everything godly with complete and total opposite of all things godly, of all things loving, of all things gracious, of all things kind. Anything that you would use to describe God, Jezebel wants the exact opposite of that. And it's in this culture, this completely morally and spiritually bankrupt culture of Israel, that we are introduced to the prophet Elijah in chapter 17. Elijah, and I'm not going to read this passage, but Elijah begins his story. Our story with him begins with a proclamation that Elijah tells Ahab. He has some boldness, and he tells Ahab that God is not pleased with what you're doing, and God has said, it is not going to rain until I say it rains. And so this drought happens for a couple of years. This drought happens. And Elijah is traveling. He's going about his business. And we're going to pick up here where he encounters another prophet, a faithful prophet of God named Obadiah. Let's read in chapter 18. So after a long time, this is after Elijah has said, Ahab, it's not going to rain. A long time has passed. The word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. So it's been dry for 3 years. All right? He says, go and present yourself to Ahab. I'm going to send rain on the surface of the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. That famine was incredibly severe. And Ahab called for Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. And Obadiah was a man who greatly feared the Lord. He took 100 prophets and he hid them, 50 men to a cave, and provided them with food and water when Jezebel slaughtered the Lord's prophets. Ahab said to Obadiah, go throughout the land to every spring and to every wadi. Perhaps we'll find some grass so we don't have to kill all our livestock. So all of this stuff is happening. And then in verse 7, I'm going to skip ahead. Obadiah is walking along the road. He's going out to do what the king had told him to do. And Elijah appears in front of him, and he encounters Elijah. Obadiah recognizes him, and he falls face down. He says, is that you, my lord Elijah? It's me, he replied. Go tell your lord, meaning King Ahab, Elijah is here. And Obadiah is like, what did I ever do to you? If I go back to Ahab now and tell him, hey, I was just with Elijah, he's going to kill me. Like, don't send me to my death. And Elijah says, you know what? Not going to happen. You go tell Ahab that I'm here. And the scripture says, and the Spirit of God is going to get you out of there somehow. I don't know how, but you're going to be fine, Obadiah. God's going to get you out of there. And as sure as I live, I'm going to have an audience with King Ahab. And so that is exactly what happens. Obadiah is, before I get into the actual encounter between Elijah and Ahab, because it's very interesting, I want us to stop for a moment to recognize Obadiah's role in this. Here we are in this society that hates God-fearing people. We are in this society in which those who follow in the line of Elijah and Obadiah are executed simply because they want to follow after God. Obadiah was instrumental in protecting and preserving a number of God's prophets and protecting his people. And I think it's worth pausing on Obadiah for just a minute to recognize that in a culture of compromise and in a culture of fear, that God calls his people to courage. How relevant is that for us today? That we live in a society that is full of compromise, that is full of fear. We are right to be fearful of the evil that happens around us on any given day, right? It is not good. Things are not well in our society. There is something deeply rotten at the core of our society. And yet, God calls us to be courageous in the face of that. And Elijah models this courage for us. He stands before Ahab, unflinching, confident in God's word. So Ahab greets Elijah. Look at what he says in verse 16. Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and he told him what had happened. So Ahab went to meet Elijah. In verse 17, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, the one ruining Israel?" I mean, there's a little bit of, like, we kind of chuckle at that a little bit, don't we? Like, Ahab, have you lost your mind, dude? You really think it's Elijah who is ruining Israel? Or is it Ahab who is ruining Israel? The wicked blame the righteous for society's problems. This is nothing new. Right? We see this today. We saw it then. It has often been the case that within civilizations around the world and throughout history that God's people have been blamed as the wrongdoers because sin blinds us to the truth. You know, the world is going to call you the problem when you refuse to bow to its idols. Can we just stop for a second and acknowledge that and be mindful of that? That today in 2025, that when you refuse to bow to the idols that the world elevates, you are going to be considered the problem. You are going to be considered the one doing wrong. The world will call you the problem when you refuse to bow to its idols. And I think we have seen that this week. As we look, as Ian said earlier, it doesn't matter what your political alignment is, whether you are a fan of Charlie Kirk or whether you are not a fan of Charlie Kirk's politics. I have seen numerous posts on social media of people who are greatly distraught over this, and they can't figure out why. Yes, it was tragic. It was an awful event, and we're heartbroken and we're sad for the family. It's always tragic when an innocent life is taken in the case of political violence like this. But how many of you have seen posts to the nature of, why is this hitting me so hard? I didn't know him personally, but it kind of feels that way, right? Even if you didn't like his politics, you didn't like some of the policies that he was an advocate for, you still feel this weight on you of, this is heavy. There's something really, really wrong here, but I can't pinpoint what it is, right? Many of us feel that. And here's where I am at on this. And here's why my best stab at why I think we're feeling that way right now. And my opinion on this may change. It may shift as I continue to think about it. But up to this moment, here's what I think is actually happening in us. Yes, we are sad that an innocent life was taken, that 2 little kids are now without their father, that a wife is without her husband. We're very sad and heartbroken over that. But this is so much deeper than politics. This is something that we as Christ followers look at, and we're recognizing something happening in our society that maybe we can't even quite put to words yet. So I want to try and help us maybe put a little bit of context around this and maybe put some words behind what this is. I think what we have experienced is an awakening to the realization that our society is not what it once was. And the relationship of our society to our Christian faith is disconnected from what we have always experienced it to be. Okay? So if I could classify the way societies or nations, countries, cultures interact with the Christian faith, I would put it into 4 different categories. And because I'm a pastor, I'm going to alliterate these. The first, that there are societies in the world that view Christianity from a place of privilege, where Christianity has this elevated status. There are certain rights and benefits and perks, different protections that are in place for Christians within that society's legal system, within the popular cultural acceptance. It has a special place in that culture's value system. Okay? I would classify, and I don't know if you can read those, they're kind of small font to make it all fit. I would classify modern day, a couple of countries like Italy would be one of those. Obviously, the Roman Catholic influence there. If you are most people in Italy are Christians, and there's a special benefit to that. A lot of the Latin American countries, Costa Rica, Honduras, Ecuador, a lot of those countries have that same status. I would say the United States fit into that category from our founding in 1776 until about the 1960s, is about when Christianity stopped being privileged in the United States, okay? The next category I would call protected. The protected category is when Christianity doesn't have the dominance that it used to have within that society's value system, but it still can continue on doing what it does without any serious opposition to it. This would be the United States from about the 1960s. Most all of our lifetimes, this is the status that we have seen here in the United States. Christianity has been protected in our entire lifetimes. Other countries, modern day, would be like South Korea, Brazil, a few other of the Latin American countries, that there is a protection in place over Christianity, but it doesn't quite get to that privileged status. The next rung on the ladder is permitted. This is where it doesn't have any special protection in place for it. You can be a Christian if you want, but it doesn't have any social value. It doesn't have any particular legal protections. This would be countries like Canada or India. And I would say now the United States. And I think a big part of what it is that we are feeling and the weight that we feel as we reflect on what has happened over the last week is a maybe an unconscious or subconscious realization that we no longer live in a country that is in this category, but we have witnessed our society dropping to this category. When we see people openly celebrate in the streets the execution of an innocent person because they disagreed with his political leanings, we've got a serious problem as a society. Christianity is simply tolerated. It has no political or social value within our society anymore. In fact, most people write it off as irrelevant. And you can see this in church attendance trends, in different polls and surveys that we do throughout our country, and the continual decline of where Christianity stands, what the status of Christ followers, or what the status of Bible-believing Christ followers looks like in our society, and our ability to navigate the public square. The respect level continues to fall. And I think this week has been a realization for us of exactly how far we have fallen. And then the fourth category below this would be persecuted. This is where Christianity is actively opposed, it's restricted, it's illegal, and it can be punished by law or taken into the hands of individuals. Countries like North Korea, China, like Nigeria, which, by the way, Nigeria is the most persecuted country on the planet. There have been more people executed for their faith in the country of Nigeria than there have been in all of the other countries of the world combined. I saw a stat the other day that in just the last couple of years, there have been 50,000 Christians in Nigeria who have been publicly beheaded simply because they're Christians. So I don't want to elevate our events and what has happened in the United States over the last couple of weeks. I don't want to blow it out of perspective and say that it's the worst thing that's ever happened in this world and that our society is the most persecuting of Christians that we have ever seen. We're not. I'm not ringing that bell. Tragic, yes. Evil, absolutely. But when we look at where many other societies are and what people are faced with on a day-to-day basis in countries like Nigeria or Somalia or Yemen or Iran or Korea, North Korea or China or Malaysia, we realize that there is still a long way for the United States to fall before we hit that level. But I think it's a helpful framework for us to look at this and go, yeah, you know what? Perhaps part of what I'm feeling is that the United States that I have always known my entire life doesn't exist anymore. My reality, the world in which I live, is not what it used to be. It's not what it once was. We live somewhere different now. Welcome to Ahab's Israel. Welcome to Rome. Welcome to China. Welcome to Nigeria. We have sat comfortably in a society that says, yeah, be a Christian, do whatever you want. You get certain perks and benefits, and there's an advantage to being a church-going member of society. And those days are gone. Now, Elijah was in a position where he's encountering this king who was squarely put in this camp, right? Ahab was down. Ahab and Jezebel, they were persecutors of all persecutors. And they wanted to get rid of everything godly. And Elijah had the courage to stand up to them and say, what you're doing is wrong. Ahab comes at him and says, are you the one ruining Israel? Look at how Elijah responds. Look at the next verse. Elijah says, I haven't ruined Israel. You and your father's family have, because you have abandoned the Lord's commands and you follow the Baals. Now here's what I want you to do, Ahab. I love the boldness of Elijah here, that he is issuing a command to a king. And to a king as vile as Ahab. That typically probably doesn't go well, right? Elijah doesn't care. Ahab, listen to me. Here's what you're going to do. I want you to bring all of Israel. Let's meet at Mount Carmel. Bring all your prophets, 450 of them. And go ahead and bring another 400 of Jezebel's prophets too. Just bring them all. So Ahab summoned everybody together. And Elijah approached the people of Israel, and here's what he said. How long will you waver between two opinions? Elijah has put his finger on something that we need to put our finger on as well. That we live in a society that we're a melting pot. The United States, we accept everybody and all types of beliefs, and we're, that's who we are as a culture, as a melting pot. And we love diversity, and that's fine. But I think where we are now is at a point where there are two incommensurate, and I know that's a big word, two incommensurate philosophical ideologies at war with each other. And what I mean by incommensurate is that there is no common ground between them. There is no way that we can rationally align, find a common basis and say, all right, this is what we can agree on, and then from here we can nitpick about policy. That is not where we are. When you can celebrate in the streets the execution of an innocent person, we have no common ground. And we as Christians need to recognize that. We as Christ followers need to understand the true evil and wickedness that is at play in our culture. There is no common ground with that ideology. It is an ideology of hate versus an ideology of love. And I don't use those terms lightly. And I don't think those terms can mean whatever you want them to mean. The Bible defines what each of those are for us. And Elijah is at a point here facing Ahab, facing the people of Israel, and he says, listen, how long are you going to waver between these two? You have to pick one. You cannot serve both. And so Elijah says, you know what? We're going to end this right now. Let's have a battle. Let's have a duel between these 450 prophets of Baal and one prophet of Yahweh. Get 2 bulls. And we're going to sacrifice them. In fact, he says, because you're a larger number, you guys pick which one you want. Pick the bull you want, prepare it, sacrifice it to Baal, and if Baal will call down fire from heaven and burn up your offering and he'll accept your offering, great. And I will do the same. And if my God, if the God, the true God of Israel calls down fire and burns up my offering, we're going to know whose God is real. And the people say, sounds like a plan. Let's do it, right? So that's where we are. We have this showdown on Mount Carmel. Look at verse 26. So the prophets of Baal, they take their bull, they prepare it, they do all of their rituals to get ready for it, and from morning until noon, it said they yell, Baal, answer us. There was no sound. No one answered. They danced around the altar that they had made. Verse 27 is perhaps one of the funniest verses in the entire Bible. At noon, Elijah mocked them. They've been doing this for hours, trying to get their god Baal to burn up their offering. And it's dead silent. The only thing you hear is the ruckus that these prophets are making. And Elijah says, hey guys, maybe yell a little bit louder. Maybe that'll do it. Like if you shout loud, he's a God, surely he'll hear you. Or maybe he's just thinking over whether or not he wants to help you out with this or not. Now, I normally like the CSB. And that's the translation that we typically read from. This one here says, maybe he has wandered away. Wandered away is not the best verbiage for what Elijah actually says here. It's a possible interpretation, and the CSB tames it down a little bit. But what Elijah actually says is, maybe your God's using the bathroom. And that's why he can't answer. Right? So it softens it a little. It's the difference between saying, I don't know, like, would you excuse me for a moment? Versus, hey, I'll be back in a minute, I got to take a leak. Right? Like, it's just very different understanding. Yeah, one's more crude, but that gets a little more of a chuckle, right? And I think that's what Elijah was doing. He was mocking them. Maybe your God's sitting on the toilet, and that's why he can't come burn up the sacrifice for you. Can you imagine the boldness that he has to stand in front of 450 people and the king and do this? So they shouted loudly. They listened to him. They're like, yeah, maybe we should get louder. So they shout louder. And then they cut themselves, and they're bleeding all over the place. And it's just an absolute chaotic scene. And I have to imagine that Elijah's just standing back watching this like, I don't know what to do with you guys. He's making fun of them for the stupidity that they have just absorbed into themselves, believing in these gods that are not real. And Elijah says, all right, now it's time for God to do his work. No one paid attention to, I love how that says that in the verse 29, that there was no one, no sound, no one answered, no one even paid attention. So you got all these prophets that are dancing around, doing all their stuff, and people have lost interest in it because there's no substance to it. And I want you guys to recognize, before we see how Elijah handles this and what God does through Elijah here, I want you to recognize that false gods will always leave you empty. but the living God displays his power in order to draw people back to himself. So here's what Elijah does. Elijah could have just said a simple prayer, God, call down fire and burn up the bull that he had prepared for an offering, right? But to eliminate any doubt of what was happening and how great God is, Elijah says, bring that 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with water, and dump it across there first. So they do. And he says, no, that's not enough. Do it again. And he had dug a trench out around the altar that's going to hold all this water. And he says, do it again. So he dumped 3 buckets of water on this. Why is that significant? It's significant for 2 reasons. One, really hard to light something on fire when it's covered in 12 gallons of water, right? Just very difficult to do. But also, you go back to where we started. What was the first edict that Elijah proclaimed? We're in a drought, right? It hasn't rained in 3 years. Water is extremely precious. When you live in an arid climate like that and it doesn't rain for 3 years, you protect every drop of water that you have. And Elijah says, dump it all over this carcass because God's going to do something amazing. And so then Elijah prays, and fire comes down from heaven and consumes the entire sacrifice and dries up every drop of that water. And the people of Israel said, okay, yeah, that God wins. And we might think that that's the end of the story, that we get a happy ending, that, hey, all of a sudden, everybody turns back to God. They get rid of all of the prophets and the temples of Baal. All of that sacrifice goes away, and now everybody turns back to the God of Israel, to Yahweh, and we all live happily ever after. But that is not what takes place. Instead, we see in chapter 19 that Ahab tells Jezebel everything that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets, all those 450 prophets, with a sword, exacting God's vengeance on his behalf. And so Jezebel sends a messenger to Elijah, and here's what Jezebel says. May the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like one of them by this time tomorrow. The most powerful woman on the planet is now threatening Elijah. And rightfully so, Elijah is scared. His life is in danger now. Can you imagine the emotional whirlwind that Elijah is going through at this point? He has just witnessed God do something incredible with the burning up of the sacrifice on Mount Carmel. God proved his power. He proved the other gods false. This should be a time for celebration. This should be a time for renewal of the people. And instead, Elijah has to run and hide for his life. Just because God does something amazing, just because God does some miracle work, does not mean evil gives up. It doesn't quit. It keeps going. And I think we can maybe identify with Elijah a little bit here. This passage tells us that Elijah, he ran and he hid, and he got inside of a cave, and he's hiding in this cave. And he eventually says, you know what, God, I've had enough. I'm tired of evil winning. Just end my life and get it over with. And I don't know about you guys, but After seeing tragedy after tragedy after tragedy this week, I was like, enough. How much more of this nonsense do we have to put up with? Like, it just keeps coming. Uncle, right? Enough. I've had enough of this. You know, I used to read this passage in Elijah and think Elijah's just kind of being this little sniveling baby, that he's like, oh, God, woe is me. Everything's so awful. I'm the only prophet left, and you know, there's nobody else out there, and I'm the only one who's obeying God, and no one is doing as good of a job as me. And there may be some of that in there. But I think probably more than anything, he's just tired of seeing evil win and seeing evil prevail and seeing good people die for no reason. He's just done. And so God comes to him while he's in this cave. And he calls him out. He says, Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I'm trying to be faithful. The people of Israel they have bowed to other gods. I'm the only one who has remained faithful to you. There's nobody else is standing up for the truth like I have stood up for the truth. And now I'm hiding for my own life. That's what I'm doing here, God. In this famous passage, it tells us that there was a great rushing wind. But God wasn't in that wind. And then there's this massive earthquake. But God wasn't in this earthquake. Right? And then there's this massive fireball, and God's not in the fireball either. He's not in the earth, wind, and fire, which it's a shame that we're not preaching this next Sunday night, because then we could remember the 21st night of September. Those of you that didn't get that, I promise that was a really good joke. In all of these spectacular things, Elijah is looking for God in something miraculous, just as he saw on Mount Carmel. But I think God is using these three things to show he's not always in the miraculous. He's not always in the spectacular. What is it that where Elijah finally gets some progress, where he actually does something with God's presence, where he actually encounters God? It's in the whisper. And I don't know about you, but when I think about a whisper, I think about how close you have to be to someone to hear it. It's not the earthquake and the fire or the great wind or the storm, those miraculous mega events that God shows himself the most. It's in the closeness of his presence when you're hiding in a cave because you don't want evil to win. And God assures Elijah, hey, you're not alone. You're not the only one. There are 7,000 prophets that I have preserved for myself who have not bowed to Baal. There's a lot of you out there, Elijah. And I think that's an encouraging reminder for us, too. That when we see wickedness happening around us and we're tempted to throw our hands up in the air and say, I give up, I quit. There's no point. There's no use in even trying to do good because those who do good just get trampled. And it only seems to be the evil that wins. In God's whisper, he reminds us that's not how it actually goes. God is in complete control of all of this. God's people are going to endure, not because the world gets lighter, or even, I would say, because God does some grand gesture, but because God's people endure because his presence is stronger than the darkness. Just like Elijah, in times of tragedy, it's okay to admit that we're scared. or that we feel sad or angry or confused. That's okay. God's not surprised by it. And he also, it's worth noting, may not comfort us in some spectacular fashion. It may come as a simple whisper. Hey guys, I got this. Even though Elijah lived in a world that celebrated evil, God was still on his throne. And he preserved people for himself to continue the work that he wanted accomplished. He still is, and he still does. So what are a couple practical things that we can do with this? How should we, as a church, respond? What should we do? Knowing what we now know about Elijah, and as we go back into our workplace this week and we talk with others about what has happened over the last week or so, what do we do? I got 4 things for you. Number 1, pray aggressively. And I chose that word aggressively on purpose. Because I want us, and that's part of why we're doing this fast that we're in the middle of, right? Is to lead us to pray more aggressively, to be more active in our prayer life. Elijah prayed, and by the way, Elijah's prayer, and I circled it on that passage, but I didn't talk about this. I just need to mention it though. Elijah didn't do that just so he could put God on display and say, look how strong my God is and look what he can do. Yeah, he mocked the prophets of Baal for their impotent God, but he did this for a very specific purpose. In his prayer to God, he said, do this, God, so that your people's hearts would return to you. Elijah aggressively prayed for people's hearts to be turned back to God, and we need to be praying for the exact same thing. Secondly, lament honestly. Elijah did. When he went and he laid underneath that tree, when he went and hid in a cave, he lamented. He acknowledged where he was at. And we a lot of times feel like as Christians that we're supposed to pretend like we got it all together and that everything's okay and we trust God so everything's going to be great. And we don't know that, right? I mean, we know that everything's going to be okay, that all things are going to work out for the good of those who are called according, love him and are called according to his purpose. But in the moment, we don't know how that's going to play out. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be angry when you see evil taking place, when you see evil celebrated. It's okay to be confused and not understand what's going on. Lament honestly. Don't just turn to, when you're trying to talk to someone else who's having a hard time wrestling through this, don't just turn to platitudes and like, you know what, God has a plan. That's not helpful in those moments. Lament honestly. Give space to grieve, to cry out, to confess that we don't understand what's happening and what's going on, or that we have an idea of how to fix it. Confess that we feel the weight of evil. That's going to give us some more authenticity, and honestly, that's going to give you more authority with the people that you're talking to. Third, speak courageously. Don't shrink back and hide in silence while the truth is maligned. Be bold, be confident in sharing the word of God with others, even if it costs you something, especially if it costs you something. Let the world see that God's people truly are different. Not with hate and not with despair, not with judgment and condemnation, but with hope. And then number 4, invite boldly. Elijah rebuilt the altar and he offered that sacrifice to God so that people's hearts would be drawn back to the Lord. And when we feel the weight of evil happening around us, we point people to the hope of Jesus. Guys, there is an unprecedented opportunity for us right now. I have seen more posts on social media about people saying, I've never gone to church, or I haven't been to church since I was a kid. But after being confronted with evil like we have seen on display, I think maybe it's worth giving it a shot. There is an openness to conversations and exploration of faith that we have not seen as a society in at least 20 years. And shame on us if we don't take advantage of that. If we don't utilize these moments, these God-given moments, as opportunities to have gospel conversations with people who are genuinely interested in exploring faith and what that looks like and what that means, then we have failed miserably. So invite boldly. Do not be ashamed to invite a coworker or a neighbor or a family member to come to church with you. In fact, one really, really simple thing you can do. I posted on our church Facebook page earlier, while I was here. I just felt like God wanted me to record a unpolished, unedited, no AI help whatsoever, just a human being to human being conversation that says, you know what? We don't understand everything that's going on in the world. We're trying to work through it too, but we would invite you to come explore that with us. And I posted that on our church Facebook page. Two things you can do with that. One, repost it or share it so that those people that you are friends with on Facebook and that live in this area will also see that and be a simple, easy way of inviting them to come to be a part of G6. The second step that you can do is to make a video like that yourself. Hold your phone in front of your face, share a couple thoughts about what you're feeling, how you're processing it, and how being a part of a Bible-believing, Jesus-following community is helping you navigate that, and invite your followers to come be a part of it too. Guys, I'm telling you, we have an opportunity to impact lives of numerous families in our area that right now are questioning whether or not they should go back to church, or whether they should go for the first time, or they want to get something figured out. Because here's what's happening. We're realizing as a society that everybody do whatever they want to do. There are no rules. There is no truth other than my own truth. That doesn't work. It simply doesn't. It sounds good for a while. It feels good for a while. Man, if everybody just does whatever they want to do, then we're all going to be happy. And we're realizing it doesn't work. We got to do something different. And that has opened the door for people to go, well, maybe there's something to faith. And I think just like when you keep scrolling past all the hate videos and you find some of the other ones of what God is doing around the country and even around the world right now, where revival is happening on college campuses, where entire nations are having gatherings of thousands and thousands of people singing praises to Jesus and hearing about Jesus, when entire college football teams are baptizing other students on their campus in the middle of the quad. I think that's a moment for us to look at what's happening around us and realize that that's God whispering to us saying, I haven't left you alone. There are 7,000 others out there who are promoting the gospel, who are building my kingdom. I want you to be a part of it. God, we are thankful for what you're doing. Even though we don't understand all of it, and even though we are heartbroken by some of the things that have happened in this past week, we are also hopeful that you are on the move in a way that none of us have ever experienced. God, my request is simple. That whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is you are up to in the world, whatever spiritual renewal and revival and breakthrough that you are about to unleash on our society, you would let G6 be a part of it. God, for each one of us in this room, would you use us in whatever way you see fit to proclaim the gospel to those around us. May you get the glory for it. In Jesus' name we pray.